Oh, hello again. Well, what am I doing now? I'm installing frets on this little fingerboard. This small fingerboard will eventually be on a ukulele. But the fretting process I'm doing here is the same one I use on my other fretted instruments, like what I used on this guitar. This particular instrument is a copy of an 1816 Spanish guitar that's attributed to Jose Martinez. It looks like a regular guitar that you know today, but there are a few differences. The main difference is that it is much smaller than today's standard guitars. One reason is that this early style of guitar is descended from small instruments, like the Spanish vihuela and the small Renaissance-style guitars of the 17th and 18th centuries. Another reason for the small size is something that hasn't been seriously studied until recently: the physical changes humans have gone through in only a few hundred years. A recent article I read in the New Yorker was about an anthropological study of how tall certain cultures have become, with an emphasis on the Northern Europeans like the Dutch. Now, back in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, people in Europe were much smaller than today, shorter, and with smaller hands. Therefore, small instruments were built. Another difference from most newer guitars is that this one doesn't have mechanical tuning gears. These are violin-style friction pegs, which most strummed and bowed instruments had up to that time. And today's flamenco guitars still do. A third difference, which might be harder for you to notice, is this bridge style. Up until the early 1800s, guitars were built similar to lutes. They had lute-style ribs, those separate pieces of wood that make up the back of a lute, similar to the back of this mandolin. And they had these lute-style bridges. Okay. The strings are tied and fit through these little holes and run over a sloped piece of hardwood. Now, a little later in the 1800s, and up to the present, bridges were fitted with ivory or bone saddles that the strings go over the top of. That allows better sound dispersion on the body. Now, I built this particular guitar because I found it to be a transitional piece that bridged the old style of lutherie, that's stringed instrument building, to the newer 19th century schools of lutherie. I found that today, many women and children prefer this one because of its smaller size. Now, the history and evolution of the guitar is comprised of hundreds of years of influences, both cultural and technical. Today's guitars are still evolving all over the world through new designs, types of wood or material used, and even through playing techniques. Now, the guitar shape we are familiar with was developed in Spain around the 15th century. This early Spanish instrument was a very small 4-course guitar, which means it had 4 double strings, 8 strings total. In a way, this type of stringing is similar to today's 12-string guitar. These 15th century guitars were very small and are the ancestors to not only today's guitars, but also the ukulele. During the Renaissance, the guitar was not considered a serious instrument, and it never got the respect the lute enjoyed, especially by the higher classes. It was in the 1700s, during the Baroque period, that the guitar became a serious instrument. A 5th course, 5 double strings, was added. more music was being written for it, and the complexity of performance increased. By the end of the Baroque period, the double strings were replaced by the 6 single strings, and the guitar started looking like those we are familiar with. Its size up to the 19th century was small and narrow. And it was in Spain where it all began, where the guitar took on new shapes. People like Manuel Torres worked with the design and construction of the guitar to increase the size and improve the sound. He was especially interested in volume and was the first maker to use fan bracing underneath the top, like this, instead of the traditional ladder bracing, which was left over from lute construction techniques. Now, Torres once built a guitar with a spruce top and papier-mâché back and sides. And that was just to prove his theory that it was the top that produced most of the volume. He is considered to be the father of the modern guitar. Today, the modern guitar has taken on many shapes, sizes, types, and playing styles. It's performed in the concert hall and by the person on the street, and everyone in between. Styles range from Bach and Vivaldi to Bob Dylan and Van Morrison. Cowboy songs, Hawaiian songs, country, folk, and rock, and everything in between. Guitars can be a tiny plastic children's instrument, or a custom hybrid combining 6-string and 12-string guitars on one instrument, or combining different basses, or even adding harp strings. There are no limitations today. It is all up to the luthier's imagination. Now, my imagination, as active as it is at times, has relaxed a bit when it comes to guitars. Even though I'm taking a sabbatical from guitar building, I still keep up on that portion of the luthier world through my membership in the Guild of American Luthiers, to which I've belonged for nearly 30 years, and through my associations with other builders and musicians. Recently, I've been honored and a little overwhelmed to be able to exhibit 2 of my guitars in the guitar's birthplace, Spain, at Forum Barcelona 2004. This is an international event taking place in Barcelona. Its goal, as they describe it, is to contribute to building a world based on peace, diversity, intercultural tolerance, and sustainability. Now, my guitars will be in the UNESCO-sponsored sustainability portion of the event, called Responsible Consumption, or rather, Consumo Responsable, to show how recycled and sustainable harvest woods can be used for new instruments and woodwork. Over 5 million people are expected to visit. Now, the steel string guitars that I've built are based on very early Martin guitars. Martin, since the mid-1800s, was highly influential in the development of the modern folk guitar. Now, the finishes on my guitars, like most of my instruments, are hand-rubbed with tung oil varnish, then polished with ground pumice, rotten stone, and a paste wax. Now, I shy away from sprayed-on lacquers and varnishes due to environmental concerns. And tung oil is a natural oil, and as it ages, turns a very pleasant honey color, especially on these light woods. And it polishes up very nicely. It's also a fairly hard finish and not affected by sweaty musicians' hands. And for this reason, guitar necks by some major manufacturers are finished with tung oil. Bindings, purfling, and inlay strips that I've used in the past were manufactured and sold through lumber stores. Now, I'm now making my own binding and inlay pieces out of all the scrap wood I've accumulated. like what I've done on this parlor guitar, where I've created the binding using scrap maple and pieces of ebony piano keys that I salvaged from a broken piano. And now, to hear how my steel string guitars sound, I'd like to introduce a friend I've known for nearly 40 years. He's a wonderful musician and songwriter who I've had the pleasure of working with for several years in one of his bands. Please welcome David Anderson.
Sarah was a statistician with a minor in ambition. Data was her specialty. She collected endlessly. She became a music fan. Collision course with every band. Stage looks better from the back. Earplugs in her fanny pack. Mandolins and mass confusion. Information and conclusions. Posters on a wall that say Cerebellum came this way. Now she travels east and west. She's collecting with the best. Different data every night. Different boy to hold her tight. Clusters of depressive symptoms. Can't find room inside her brain. When she gets depressed, she goes to Spain. Mandolins and mass confusion. Information and conclusions. Posters on a wall that say Cerebellum came this way. Mandolins and mass confusion. Information and conclusions. Posters on a wall that say Cerebellum came this way. Sarah was a statistician with a minor in ambition. Data was her specialty. She'd collected endlessly.
I want to thank you all for stopping by my workshop. I really hope you enjoyed your visit, and I enjoyed talking to you. Thanks also to my good friends who stopped by to play, Rin Eric and David Anderson.